YouTube. So if you don't know where it is, you can't find it, but if you do know where it is, you can. So and then we'll put out the link after the hour. So last week we had a good conversation, or 2 weeks ago we had a good conversation, and today we'll kind of follow on from that. We normally run through in this session maybe a little bit of follow-up, any news that people have that they wanted to share from the last couple of weeks, things that they've seen that interest them. And then something we wanted to talk about this time was some gamification. So people will see that Merrin McLeod is on the call. So she's our product manager for NZ COVID Tracer. So I've got some super hard questions for her to answer about gamification and kind of what we've done in COVID Tracer and what we haven't done, and maybe things that we could do. And then I've got we normally then finish up with a bit of a mailbag, and there's a question in there, which is one which is kind of on the lips of the media at the moment, which is around vaccine certificates and the domestic use of vaccine certificates. So thought that might be an interesting thing for people to, to have a wee chat about at the end. So we might just start with some follow-up from the medical school question, which I asked last time, or the education system in terms of teaching our health professionals about digital, and got some really good feedback in the Kiln forum about how we might go about engaging. Certainly, the most interesting thing for me was the experiential piece. So in that, we know trainee interns, and I know physiotherapy students do a lot of placements, and maybe one of the options that came up was you do a placement on how you might use technology to solve a problem. So rather than necessarily going and reading books about how technology works or maybe how research works, you can get directly involved. So that seemed to me like a pretty good idea. I don't know if anyone else had any other thoughts about how we might better educate our junior workforce or our students. So feel free to pipe up if you had a suggestion there. Otherwise, I can direct you to the conversation that's happening on the HINS Kiln type thing, which is interesting because that's all moved to HINS. So we had there was the Kiln forum, runs on Discourse, was running under the UK Digital Health Forum, and that's all moved under HINS in the last sort of 2 weeks. So if you wanted to have kind of an online but not a live chat with people, particularly clinical people who are interested in informatics, you can go and join there and be a part of that conversation. So big shout out to my friend Nathan Kershaw, who's kind of the technical and/or anesthetic genius that sits behind running that forum, for all the work he did to kind of move it from one place to the other. So good work there. Something else that some of you might be familiar with in the news in the last 2 weeks is it turns out a woman called Elizabeth Holmes is going to trial in the US right now. So some of you might know she was the CEO of Theranos, and my reading of the tea leaves suggests that there's kind of this argument about whether she was incompetent or deliberately fraudulent, and that kind of seems to be where this case is going to be decided. So did anyone have any thoughts about seeing any of that in the press that they wanted to talk about? No? I think it's an interesting warning for the health system, because there's, the Silicon Valley run fast and break things model, and sometimes that comes up against if the science isn't there, or we don't know that it's not going to kill people problem, which we have to deal with in the health system. The hubris might get in the way of us doing the right thing sometimes, and I don't know whether to feel sorry a little bit for Elizabeth Holmes, or to kind of want to make sure that she's dealt with in a severe way. Diana, this is kind of probably something that you deal with on a. Yes, there you go. Robin's holding up a picture.
Yeah.
And Diana,
if you've read this book, you won't feel sorry for her.
Okay. So what's the name of the book?
It's
So
called bad blood.
Bad blood, right?
Yeah.
I'll make sure we find that, and we'll put a link in the. I'll call it in the show notes. We'll call it that. So bad blood.
A long way from incompetence.
I totally agree with that.
Those people's eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think about it, Diana? Given that you kind of work in that medical devices space.
Well, I totally agree with Robin. If you read that book, you'll know that she was not as innocent as she deems to be, and no one can turn that innocent. I mean, no one can change their voice and start to look like Steve Jobs over time as well. I could try, but I don't think you guys would like me then. But one, just an interesting twist to this conversation, not from the technology part, but I was just having a chat with a couple of investors yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that actually at this point in time, there's a lot of money being thrown out into that health sector at the moment. And in the States, you know, with the startups, they just, I think they've reached, there was a startup that raised over 550 million, 500 million for a $5 million valuation, which is totally ridiculous. And we're kind of just saying that at this point in time, you know, if nothing else, it's time for another. It's almost time that another Elizabeth Holmes emerges, because it's just a lot of stupid money around. Yeah. But that's just slightly different thought.
Yes, fair enough. Fair enough. Mary, have you got any interesting news in the last couple of weeks?
So I have popped up a few new articles on Yammer. So the first two, these are for our New Zealand case studies. The first one is, bear with me while I double screen. New Zealand startup Kahu has secured $3 million in funding to continue development of its AI tech for detecting skin cancers. So this was initially spun out of MoleMap, and it was established to bring tech into the sector. And the software was developed through collaboration with IBM and Monash University, and uses AI to analyze images of the patient's skin and detect signs of melanoma, which I thought was pretty cool. Story 2, digital therapeutics pioneer mhealth has announced the first international rollout of its NHS-approved COPD app, myCOPD, in New Zealand. And the rollout is initially focused on the Māori and Pasifika population, making it the first NHS-approved digital self-management program for COPD to be available in a clinical setting beyond the British borders. So I'll put those both up on our Yammer page if anyone wants to look at those articles a bit further.
Very good. I just put a link to it in the chat there. Another thing that came up for me in the last, probably the last 24 hours. So Apple's going to be releasing iOS 15 next week. Some of you will know that we've done some work in the digital consent and transparency space in terms of the problem statements. Apple's obviously, you know, well resourced in this space, and when we talked to them originally about some of the work they do, the number that got thrown at us was they've got about 500 people working on this now. We can't claim to have anywhere near that, but they've put into iOS 15 some interesting sharing features. So if you go and have a look on the Apple website with the latest version of iOS, there's an ability to kind of set up permanent sharing with family members and kind of get notifications as a family member of what's happening in someone's medical records. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then something which is really kind of heavily technology focused and probably focused in the COVID space at the moment. Starting to see quite a bit more coming out around using spectroscopy for finding COVID-19. So there seems to be a few different models that are coming through, and the best version of that is an article I read that's just been published in Nature, which has come out of India, where they've used a Raspberry Pi to automate a bunch of blood testing in the lab by using spectroscopy. So you add the reagent, so the Raspberry Pi automatically adds the reagent, and they use a laser spectrometer to analyze the blood sample. So it's kind of from super high tech coming out of New York to super low tech in India using spectroscopy for both COVID and for doing light stuff. Did anyone else see any news in the last couple of weeks that you're interested in sharing? Could be local stuff, could be international stuff in the health technology space.
I've just got a little plug for the work that another team in the ministry are doing. So the Digital Enablement Program have just posted their stories on our website. I can share the link in chat if people are interested. So that's a lot of 19, I think, different initiatives working with local community groups to address access primarily into primary care services. And there's a whole range of different initiatives in there that there's quite a variety. It's worth a read if you want to know what's going on, and up and down the country as well.
I think, so I can see you sitting there, Brett, you've actually got some news. So do you want to tell people your news? I'm assuming it happened last night.
Never assume, John. Never assume. I just did a presentation on the website we've created for collecting Māori descent and iwi affiliation data. Which is linked to the booking system, the landing page for completing your booking system. So that actually doesn't go out until 8:30 tonight. But the site
8:30
is,
tonight.
That's when the booking system sprint, the latest sprint goes out, which has our link in it. So we've got a site. We've got a site going live as we speak, but there's no link from the booking system as yet.
So that's happening. That's happening at 8:30 tonight, and so the project has basically come out of a bunch of work that's gone into the vaccine program, and then Brett's work, and some work done by Laura Cleary in the Ministry of Health, which kind of from a ministry perspective, we're aware that we underestimate particularly Māori ethnicity by about 20% in the NHI number, and so the work Brett's been doing is how do we gather by Māori for Māori iwi affiliation data, basically. So the thought being that as we start to gather that information, you need to start somewhere, and how do we kind of add this back into the NHI number, but actually kind of create kind of ownership and Māoridom around this. So hopefully make the NHI much more accurate, but also kind of create an asset for Māoridom. So that's kind of been with Stats and Te Puni Kōkiri and the Data ILG Iwi Leaders Group. So lots of people involved, and well done, Brett, if that's going live now and going to be connected to the vaccine booking system tonight. So
you can, happy to send the link out to the live system. You can actually link to it without going through the booking system, but we're just taking it a step at a time. We've got a non-digital capability going out soon for collecting the data as well. But there are 2 new collections, so that's exciting. And it's really, I think one of the great things that is coming out of this is and when I say we, the Crown, changing our attitudes towards sharing all of the data that we collect. We tend to be a little bit, in health, I can only speak for health and only part of health probably, but we tend to be a little bit insular with the data we gather instead of actually sharing it out with people who could also use it for, to get much better outcomes as well. In this case, Māori or iwi.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. Did anyone else have any news to share? Things that you've seen in the last couple of weeks? Yeah.
I'm just having difficulty with my sound, but we in the Northern Region hospitals, we've just started a trial of the Blue Mirror AI. I don't know if other people have heard of that, but Physight, New Zealand company, Romy Noons has developed a iPad-based AI system for helping run through and check the donning and doffing process for PPE. And we're starting a little trial of it in the North Shore, Auckland and Middlemore hospitals. So that's quite fun.
You get to report back to us then, Robin, so we'll make sure we've written this down and you get to report back once you've done your trial so we can see how it went. Certainly I know Capital Coast Capron Coast was interested in this as well. So I think they were based in Australia or Canterbury or somewhere, and then
so Romi's based here, but he developed it with clinicians in Melbourne. So it's being used in Melbourne and somewhere in the UK, and a few of us, including Canterbury and Hawke's Bay, have done little trials of it in for training purposes. But now we're doing a trial of it in the wild for accuracy, so that will be interesting.
So what's that, Diana?
No, I was going to say that, Robin, when you finish with the trials, we'd love to write it up in MedTech Bites.
Yep, cool.
And John, can I give a plug to MedTech Bites here? So MedTech Bites is a newsletter, monthly newsletter that's published by the Consortium for Medical Device Technologies. And we're always after stories from the community. It is really there just to promote New Zealand MedTech, whether it's companies, researchers, or clinicians, or anyone else in that stakeholder group. So if you're interested, just reach out to myself.
Cool.
Thanks.
We'll do.
And can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can.
Just whether anyone knows, because I've been following some podcasts and heard that NHSX is going to be folded back into the NHS and into NHS Digital. I just wondered, John, if you're connected in it at all, you know what's going on there?
I am not directly connected to that, but I'd heard the same thing. I don't know how I'd heard that. We're probably having a conversation with them in the next week or two about the vaccine certificate stuff. So maybe not them, but more NHS Digital. So I'll ask the question again. Last time I asked the question directly, I got a "we don't know, we've just found out" answer. So maybe they know more about it. It's a little bit like health reforms, isn't it, in New Zealand? So we'll tell you when we know type answer. Okay, very good. Now on the call we've got Merrin McLeod, who's from our data and digital team in the ministry.
Hello.
And hey, Merrin. And so Merrin's our product manager for NZ COVID Tracer. And I might just start with a real simple question for you, Merrin. What do you spend as a product manager or a product owner? What do you spend most of your day doing? Like, because it's a new term for the health system, I think. So it's an interesting question.
Yes, I'm not sure. So at the moment, with the recent outbreak and with the change in record keeping policies, there's been a lot of attention on the app and of the usage of it. So I end up spending quite a lot of time working together with our comms friends and our media team friends and our policy friends and people at DPMC. There's a lot of, it really does involve a lot of just caring deeply, explaining a lot of explaining and re-explaining and explaining to people who can then explain it further. It's interesting being in so it's not something that I've done in the government context before, where there's so many people involved in every single little part of administering this this piece of technology. So there's there's a lot of interfacing with different departments and with different organizations.
So I'm guessing that you read the media piece published yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before, between Mark Dalder's
one? Yeah.
And so
absolutely, get that in my.
Should we expect the number of scans to go down, or?
I don't know. It's interesting. So the peak that we had, the very first peak in August last year, was right after we went to level 2 for the first time. Well, right after, I think it would have been Auckland moved to level 2. So that was the highest previously. Was actually, it wasn't August, it was early September. And we've broken those records by reasonable margin, and I think probably we'll see a peak as soon as Auckland, our friends in Auckland, start moving around a little bit more. There's always an interesting relationship between mobility and usage of the app, because in theory, if people are more mobile, they're moving around more, they're going to more places, they should be scanning more, but we don't end up seeing that in the data. We do see when people completely stop moving around or completely stop going to businesses, like on Christmas Day, they stop using it. But in general, like when level 4 kicked in, there was an increase in usage rather than a decrease, even though there'd obviously been a massive decrease in mobility.
I mean, I can see you got your hand up for a question. What do you want to know?
I've just come from a meeting looking at digital inclusion. So this is cross-agency. How do we ensure services are accessible to all different cohorts of people? And there was a lady there from the Office of Disability. So it just made me think, and COVID Tracy did get mentioned, so yay. But how do you manage, as a product owner, how do you imagine that tension between making sure the features are usable, but then like addressing all of the different use cases, and like where do you do those trade-offs to go, there's going to be some people that we just can't get it to for whatever reason at this point in time. I just like to understand, like, how is that managed as a product owner?
I think some of that is it comes into making sure that we maintain those relationships with the policy teams who are making the rules around usage of it, and also teams who make the kind of physical analogs. And sometimes I wonder if that should be part of the same. It really should be part of the same product. You know, those alternatives like the ballot boxes and that kind of thing. Yeah, but the something that I've learned quite painfully while working on this product is that it's not enough to just care about accessibility and want to do right by people. It really does take a lot of ongoing effort and ongoing testing, and even like we've done everything that I can think of to do right for example, screen reader usage, and we've still ended up with some quite serious bugs for screen reader users. So
is that a little bit, Mirren, just because of how widely it's in use? So, you know, if you only had 100,000 users and they all use iPhones, life's a lot easier. But I think we were talking about this yesterday. We had a chat with Google about vaccine certificates, and they were busy telling us, oh, don't worry, you know, it goes all the way back to Android version 5, and we're like, oh, well, it better go back to Android version 5 because we've got a whole lot of COVID tracing users on Android version 5. So it's easy for the technology people to assume that the world is all moving at, you know, the pace of the new iPhone that got released yesterday. But yeah, sometimes it's not.
Again, it's in government. You can't afford to just say, well, this is this is our market, and anyone who doesn't fit these criteria, well, they're just not part of our market. Everyone, like, we really have to, we can't afford to have a cutoff, and we kind of have to, but you know, wherever it is, it's quite painful. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, John, it's interesting just rolling out what is a fairly straightforward website, but a beautiful one, I might add. There are the little nuances between things like between different makes and models of phones and different operating systems, and even the same phone, you know, a different model of the same phone, and then all of your accessibility things as well. You think, oh, this is going to be easy. We'll just knock it up and test it out and away we go. But man, that was a complete underestimation. I have to tell you, the amount of testing we had to put in to cover all of those things was just massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And you end up, like, you test it with all of the scenarios and all of the different devices and assistive devices and that kind of thing. And then you find some bugs, you fix them, and by fixing them for one group of people, you break it for another.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like my experience. So
yeah.
So I remember pouring through every single accessibility feature on the iPhone probably about 6 months ago. And it turned out I had something turned on which was very unconventional, which related to the amount of like screen movement on my iPhone, and Apple had done a point update which had broken the feature, which doesn't appear, and we had to turn all of the features off in order to find when you turned it back on. That's when the problem was.
Which one was?
Occurred.
That was a nightmare. Yes, yeah. I forgot about that.
So to kind of to turn the conversation to being about gamification, which is what I promised the people. Obviously, we've gamification is something that there's a whole industry around games and gamifying activities. Can you give us a bit of a background around kind of what type of people have we talked to about gamification, or like the organizations that we've been in touch with?
So I think the discourse about this really got started in sort of late last year when there were not that many people using the app, or it was reducing, and there were a lot of people who had the same take, which was, if this was like Pokemon Go, if it was more fun, then maybe people would use it. It turns out that we have a lot more users in New Zealand. Well, I'm pretty sure that we have more users in New Zealand than Pokemon Go, even in November, December last year. So just putting a whole lot of Pokemon in there, I think wasn't gonna cut it. So we had
not
to be
necessarily our
creative.
target audience either, right?
Not necessarily, yeah. And again, it's this thing of, well, it really needs to work for a lot of people, not just the people who are easily amused. Yeah. So we talked to we talked to, like, I think Robin, we had a conversation with you last year. Oh, is she still on the call? Yeah.
Yep.
And a bunch of academics, some professionals, both in general UX and also a games company, Pickpock, and got a whole lot of insights into what we might be able to do and what they thought might be a good idea, varying wildly in terms of what they suggested.
I think we even went as far as to ask a university class specializing in user experience to give us feedback of, in front of the class. So, class, here's your project for the week. Tell us how COVID Tracer could be better. So that was quite interesting feedback, I think, because it was so diverse in terms of what people expected. Obviously, kind of. I think something we realized quite early on is that there's a difference between gamifying things and just good user experience and kind of behavioral cues for people. Do you want to kind of explain kind of how we've thought about the difference between the two of them?
So we had both so we talked to both the games people and also the behavioral science people. So we had some conversations with behavioral science Aotearoa. We got some advice from some behavioral scientists at PwC around this kind of thing. The consistent advice that we got from all of the games people and the UX people and the behavioral science people was to do A/B testing as much as possible, and so we've tried to do some of that. And it's worked reasonably well, I think.
And I think the underlying reason for that is you have to do A/B testing because it turns out the thing you thought it was going to do, it turns out it doesn't do that at all. So people make changes people make changes to their applications and it turns out either it was the wrong thing to do or it leads to some sort of unexpected behavior because it's really hard to figure out what people's motivations might be. I think one of the interesting...
You've got your head in the thing the whole time. You don't realise what people...
Yeah, the obvious. So when the PICPOC people turned up and talked to us, they said, which is a screen that everybody loads? And we said, oh, the scanning screen. And it said, well, how come you say manual entry at the bottom of it? And we're like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, the only button you've got on the screen is to add a manual entry. And at the same time, you're trying to ask them to scan a QR code. They said, it doesn't make any sense. And we're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was the only
and it was kind of this
button.
just almost completely embarrassed acknowledgement that, well, we hadn't really thought about that at all. Do you know what I mean? And it just, when you get told that, you feel it's so obvious that surely we must have thought about that before. And it's not as if we hadn't tried thinking about that really carefully. And we've been working with Rush Digital since we started this project, and they had designers on it, and we'd gone through user flows, and all of this work had been done, and still we kind of missed this really obvious thing up front. But it kind of did lead to, you know, I think the conversation led to the really interesting insight around trying to tie your gamification back to the activity or the action you're trying to achieve, which was everyone kept coming back to, oh, we need something that incentivizes people to scan. And that's a really easy place to go. And so people go, well, we need a leaderboard for how many people we've scanned or how often you have scanned. And if you scan more, then we reward you more. And of course, there's a perverse incentive with that, isn't there?
Yeah. So there's two perverse incentives really. So there's first of all the kind of obvious one of incentivizing people to go out and scan into places where they're not really going. So you walk down the street and you just scan them all, and then you get more points, and that's great. But then it's not reflective of your actual activities. So your diary becomes virtually useless. And then the other thing that we had to keep reminding ourselves on during the long level 1 was that it probably wouldn't stay level 1 forever. And we don't really want to be building things into the app that encourage extra mobility. We don't really want to be building anything in there that makes people go like, oh, I haven't left the house today, and it is level 4, and I am meant to be isolating, but I haven't scanned, and the app is telling me to, so I'm just going to go out to the supermarket. Like, we don't want to encourage people who should be staying home to leave the house. And so it was a really tricky balance to hit, and we ended up with something quite subtle, which is the diary completion metric. So you get a very minor reward of a nice swirly thing if you've got an entry, even a manual entry for each of the last 14 days.
It feels minor, but I think the interesting thing is, from kind of at least what we've seen a little bit on Twitter and on other social media, and certainly kind of what we've had in email feedback, people like the swirl. So, you know, there are certain people in the world that see the swirl because they've got 14 and are unwilling to give it up because it feels like they've achieved something. So despite it seeming quite trivial, you know, these things are really interesting. Did you want to talk about the notification side of things, Miriam? Because I think that's another really interesting angle for us.
It is another,
in some ways it feels like a really natural thing to want to do, but I think certainly there's, particularly in the impact kind of context, because we can measure that directly. So
we needed to be really careful with anything to do with notifications. And again, it was something that we got as a recommendation from almost every behavioural scientist and games person that we talked to, was that there should be nagging notifications. If you haven't used it for a while, a reminder that you should use it. And we talked to our business users, so not business users, our the contact tracing teams within the ministry, and they were dead against it. They were basically saying, look, if people get too many notifications that aren't about having an exposure, you know, being at a location of interest or having a Bluetooth ping, they'll be much less sensitive to receiving those notifications when they are the really serious ones. And we saw that when we sent we sent out a notification just reminding people to scan to kind of test what the reaction from people would be. On
It's that A/B
Queen's
testing you're
Day.
talking
Yeah. So we tried to be scientific about it, and it would have been on Queen's birthday weekend. So knowing that long weekends, there was often a drop off that just didn't recover of usage. So we sent out a notification saying, remember to scan when you're out and about on the long weekend. And we got quite a lot of social media feedback and email feedback and that kind of thing from people just saying that it made them crap their pants because it was this notification on their home screen from that had COVID in the name, and yeah, it made them really.
People assumed it was a "you've got COVID" notification.
Yeah. So we had to kind of manage that. Like we do actually want people to be nervous when they receive an unexpected notification from COVID Tracer, because some of the time it is a notification saying that you need to isolate now, you need to go arrange getting a test. So it kind of held back on the reminders for a while, but then we have put them in, and then almost immediately disabled them because we went into level 4.
But there's also the weekly reminder thing as well, which is I think is a really interesting.
Reminder,
yeah. So I think that one was really about sometimes it's really hard to pick up a habit, and so the thought was, so when we started thinking about this, there are people that scan but don't scan all the time, and so that thought that the swirl might help them, and then you've got a group of people that got the app last year and have never opened it again. So the question was, well, how could we prompt people to open the app so that they might move into that second camp? And so this is where the 7-day reminder came.
Especially knowing that there's always this big spike in usage when there's an outbreak or when there's a scare. We know that there's a lot of people who only really pick it up when there's a scare and then put it back down again. And so sending a reminder to them, I'll share my screen with the what these look like, because probably a lot of you haven't seen these. So basically, if you get if it's been a week since you updated your diary, either since you scanned in or added a manual entry, you get a little notification on the home screen and a friendly little reminder on the dashboard and in your diary saying, you know, it's still important even if you don't leave the house, and don't forget to scan in when you're out and about. So we had this.
Can I say, is this a product owner or product manager's best friend, Figma? Certainly something we're using a lot in data and digital in the Ministry of Health. And do you want to just for the people that have never seen Figma before, what's the 2-sentence description of what Figma does?
So this is a design tool with and we use it in the app team to have all of the screens of the app. So here's the different types of alert, and here's what all of the different states of the dashboard can look like. It's kind of like a cheat sheet for the app.
A visual cheat sheet.
Yeah, all the onboarding screens. If you download it for the first time, we put some nice these lovely illustrations in the onboarding recently, which I think a lot of people onboarded some time ago, and maybe we'll never see them.
Haven't had the benefit of.
Yeah.
So what else are you working on in terms of the gamification? I suppose in my head I wonder about the trial that you've got, which you're about to start running in Wellington. I don't know if you want to talk to people about that in a very short way.
Oh, we can do around the NFC scanning. So so are people familiar with NFC technology? I'll assume that some are and some aren't. So near field communication is a technology that makes snapper cards or AT hop cards or paywave work. So you hold something close to something else and some data goes in one direction or another. And we've worked out a way to have little tags, so sort of the size of a snapper card or something like that, that have all of the same data as a QR code, and you can check into the place by tapping your phone to it. It doesn't work on all phones, but for people that it does work for phones that it does work for, it's hopefully a bit quicker, hopefully a little bit less friction, and we're assured that young people love it.
Yeah. So we've now got some stickers at the Ministry of Health up on the outside of the building. So
and you've tried them out, right, John?
I tried it yesterday. And it definitely works faster. So essentially, a phone doesn't need to be unlocked. The screen. So I've got an iPhone. Your screen just needs to be on, and then you tap your phone against the screen. You don't have to open the app, and it adds the check-in for you. So certainly worked for me, and that was largely the thought was if you could put it on the table in a restaurant, or you could put it somewhere other than the door, people could do it a bit faster and a bit more convenient, in a bit more convenient way. So Mirren, I think, is looking to measure the change in people's behaviour when they realise that there's an NFC sticker there. One of the other interesting things.
Yeah. We've got some hypotheses, and we're going to test them with research. Carry on, John.
Very good. I was just going to say, that the only other thing is something else we're probably testing is how far our certification model goes. So last year we started talking about harbour masters and speedboats and oil tankers or freighter ships, and so one of the things we're interested in this is we don't want to make all of the NFC tags for all of the country, so we'll publish a specification for that, and we've got a couple of companies that are willing to to our specification make stickers for businesses. So the ability for the business to request some stickers, pay for them, and then be able to put them on their tables. We kind of see that as it's a value add for the business. So come to our business, it's something that's easier and better and might be convenient for younger people to be able to scan in. So we'll see how that goes as well, because that's quite different for us as a business model, I think, moving into that space. So that's does anyone else? Diana, you've got a question? Does anyone else have any questions? Go Diana, shoot.
Okay, so this isn't so much about the gamification of the app, but are we looking at using the COVID app as a digital passport?
Well, I think we've jumped into the next conversation. So I was going to raise a question. I was going to raise a question with people, which was around vaccination certificates. And so if no one else has any other questions about kind of what Mirren's been working on, we might go into that. So
there is a question about whether this is something that kind of, it doesn't necessarily keep me up at night anymore, but whether that's within the remit or not.
Yeah.
Of what people think should be in it.
Yeah, and so we've got to balance what we think people want versus not kind of pushing down a slippery slope. So in terms of the digital inclusion piece, in terms of privacy, we're kind of in a unique position where, to Mirren's point before, it's not our job. It's not necessarily our job to serve a certain segment of the market that wants this thing. We have to think about kind of the entire population, and how do we balance the needs and wants of different groups. So there's some complexity in it, of course. So when we when we move to publishing the certificates that we're working on at the moment, so some of you will have seen on the HINS website, we're working on myCOVID record. myCOVID record will show you, using our new digital identity, your COVID vaccinations and your COVID test results, which is interesting, the test result bit I can come back to. You'll see, you'll be able to create, in the first instance, a PDF with a QR code in it for a vaccine certificate. And so it can be printed out or it can be posted to your house. So it kind of is a digital product, but it's on paper. And then the next version will be one you can save to a wallet. And the question for us that we're trying to solve at the moment is that wallet an Apple wallet or a Google wallet? Is it a COVID tracer wallet? Is it a third-party wallet from someone else like Microsoft? So we know Microsoft's got one, and there are a bunch of other ones. There's a bunch of trade-offs in that. So presumably, if all we did was make it work in COVID tracer, it doesn't necessarily suit if you go to somewhere like China and it has to be integrated on a day-to-day basis with what the Chinese government wants. So there's a problem there. There's also, if we're only assuming the wallet is one app, how do you go about maybe domestic vaccine certificates? So the domestic vaccine certificates is something that's come up in the last couple of weeks. There's no policy around this yet, but kind of interested in what people think about probably the pros and cons of domestic vaccine certificates, because I can see value in them because it might encourage people to get vaccinated, but I can see cons in it because it deliberately excludes people because they've not been vaccinated. And it's almost more contentious than the vaccination process itself. So, there's an argument going on about whether you make vaccination compulsory or not. And are vaccination certificates in a domestic context that by default? It's an interesting question. And I suppose that's what I'm kind of throwing open to the conversation is, are they good or are they bad? Are they neither? Should we do it? What should we think about when we do it? What do people think? And I see, Diana, you've still got your hand up, so I'm assuming you've got an opinion.
Oh, sorry, the hand wasn't meant to be up. I'm sorry.
But
I'll just share this. In Malaysia, they have an app that which is called mySejahtera, and it's kind of like their national app for doing everything, And once you've had your COVID vaccine, you have this digital certificate on your app, and after 14 days or whatever, it turns yellow. And that gives you, it actually turns yellow. My cousins just sent it to me because they've all been saying that they've turned yellow and I couldn't get this. But the certificate turns yellow overnight, and that is kind of in Malaysia, that your passport for being able to get out and do things. This is quite interesting.
Yeah, so is it an accepted thing in Malaysia? So people don't mind that they're being.
No, people don't mind at all, and also the other thing is that it's the only way that the government is able to encourage people to get vaccinated, because the COVID is actually really rampant in Malaysia at the moment, and it's really killing the economy. So they need to do something about it, and this is kind of their way of, I guess, tackling some of the issues. But it's quite cool, I guess. So, if your myCOVID ad, if it's going to encourage me to turn yellow.
Bringing it back to gamification, I wonder if anyone does it just for the badge.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
It's an interesting thing. I suppose the key problem for us is that assuming that someone needs to be vaccinated if they can't be, puts a lot of obligation on kind of society to be kind to the people that can't be vaccinated. And it's not, a little bit like a lot of disability, it's not necessarily something that's obvious to you as to why the person hasn't been vaccinated. So it's not like you walk around saying, I've got a disability you can't see. So I think there are problems and there are benefits to us in this. And so I don't think there's a good answer. I'm interested in what people think are the reasons we could or we shouldn't. Damon, I can see you're sitting there and you're off mute.
Yeah, look, I was just going to comment on that. I think that if people have reasons for not getting vaccinated and we're using a tool to help communicate that, then their one should turn yellow too, if that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
So everyone gets a yellow sign. if they've either been vaccinated or can't be vaccinated. So they're not being discriminated against on that basis. Because, you know, when you're going to show it to somebody, they're just going to look for the yellow. They're not going to look for why it's yellow.
Yeah.
The second point that I was going to make is it's really important, and you've touched on it, is about the equity and the access by Māori for Māori. So if we think about people that don't have access to a digital device to have this information, that needs to be made available to their iwi or local provider who can provide them with the printout that they need, because they're not going to have a printer at home either to print this off.
Agree. So that's why we're starting with the PDF version. And so at the moment you probably know you may not, that people can order letters from the Ministry of Health. So essentially that channel is going to stay in place, and instead of letters, we'll be sending out these vaccine certificates. So we can post them out to your house, or post them to where you want, or you could probably go and see your GP and get one printed out, or get one printed out at a pharmacy. So looking at that first, PDF documents that have a QR code in them, so they'll work in the same way as a digital one, and then go from there to being more digital after that. So basically everyone can participate straight out, and then we can add things later on. Bearing in mind, to date, we've really focused on, because this domestic vaccine thing is very fraught, we think the certificate thing is fraught in a domestic context, we've really only focused on international certification. So for a lot of New Zealanders, unless you're planning on going overseas in the next 6 to 12 months, you probably don't need one. But of course, you know, the country probably needs to open its borders again as well. So that's part of the reason that we're interested in making them available. But no, good points, Damon. Certainly on the top of the agenda, because we realise that we can't just make these on phones, because not everybody has a phone. Or as we've learned in the current outbreak, there might be a phone, but it's one phone in the house rather than one phone per person. So,
well, look, I mean, you listed off a rattled off a list of places where people could do that, like the GP and the pharmacy. My concern is for a large segment of our population, predominantly Māori, who don't engage with those outlets.
Yeah.
Right. They're the ones that, and they're also the ones that are highest in the unvaccinated rates. So my point is that you have to be willing to reach out and make information available to others in the community who can do that, who can bridge that. So, you know, we're working through a process at the moment to help with that, but, you know, we just set up barrier after barrier, and so we need those to drop faster. The other thing I wanted to mention too in testing, in relation to testing, is as that I would like to see the COVID test results made available in the app or through the myCOPD. Well, you mentioned it's on the website, but again, those test results need to include test results from other parties like Rako Science, for example, with the saliva testing.
Yeah. So,
you know, that has to move faster as well from my point of view.
Oh yeah, everything has to move faster and be better. It's kind of the underlying model that we're trying to follow, because it's an interesting thing. I think if we were to sit down and park for a couple of months, we'd miss just about all of the deadlines that are set for us. So there's a little bit of trying to make sure that we keep going. At the same time, we're trying to make sure we're not missing the important things, to your point, Damon. So that's good feedback. Did anyone else have any thoughts on domestic vaccine certificates that they wanted to add? I realise we've not got much time left. So
John, just wondering if you know much around the reasoning that the UK, or not the UK, England, are dropping their aspirations around, other than their population didn't like the idea. Is there more to it than that?
It's a good question. I think so. This is probably more of a political view than anything else, but I kind of feel justified having spent 4 years living over there. My view is they probably want to put the whole COVID thing behind them, and so having the check-in reminds everybody on a daily basis that COVID's still a thing. And I think really what they're trying to do is normalize COVID And so we're kind of still as a country, we're still thinking about the elimination strategy and keeping COVID out as long as possible, whereas perhaps it feels like a reminder to them if they were doing it locally. That's about all I can think of. One of the things that we've thought about is, so the international certificates we've been looking at contain a bunch of vaccine information, and that's required in order to travel across the border, because the other country probably wants to know when you got vaccinated and the type of vaccination you had. We were thinking in a local context that you want to make it as privacy preserving as possible, because you probably don't want Ticketek to know your vaccination history or your testing history. And so you maybe the NHS realised that they didn't have a model which meant that they could do that. I honestly don't actually know. We've got some conversations coming up, and it's certainly a question we're interested in asking, because parts of Europe are both continuing to use it across borders and using it locally as well. I know Denmark has been in the news this week because they've stopped it. But yeah, beyond that, Phil, I can't give you a concrete answer, sorry. I don't know if anyone else knows the answer. No? Okay. Well, if no one else has any other moments of inspiration to add, we might call it there, and we'll do this again in 2 weeks. If anyone has a topic idea for 2 weeks' time, I'm interested. We could pick up a conversation around what hopefully might be in everybody's hands by then, the myCOVID record, so we can get ideas for features and feedback about what doesn't work very well. And or we could get feedback on Brett's solution. If you happen to be Māori and you fill out your EV affiliation, I'm sure Brett would be more than willing to add things to his backlog for version 2. So until then, thanks a lot, everybody, and appreciate an hour of your time. Hopefully this has been worthwhile. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John. Ka kite.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, and in the week of Te Reo in New Zealand. Ka kite anō.
Thank you.